My name is Carol, I'm 68 years old. And my own son tried to use my home as a free summer camp for his family right after I had heart surgery. Before I tell you how I legally locked them out of my house, my will, and my life for good, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The sound that ripped me from my sleep wasn't my alarm. It was a violent pounding. Not a knock. Pounding. The kind that rattles the whole door frame, the kind that means someone isn't asking for entry, they're demanding it. It was just after 7 in the morning. The sun was barely up over the Blue Ridge Mountains here in Asheville, North Carolina. I clutched the collar of my robe, my hand instinctively going to my chest where the ache was a constant, dull reminder of the surgery 3 weeks ago. Every movement was slow, deliberate. Every breath felt measured. I'm a retired librarian. I live for quiet. My husband Frank and I built this house with our own hands. A sanctuary of peace and books. Since he passed, that peace is all I have left of him. And on that morning it was being shattered. The pounding stopped, replaced by the shrill ring of my phone on the nightstand. I knew who it was. I let it ring 3 times before my hand, shaking slightly, picked it up. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Carol, my dear mother-in-law. Brenda's voice dripped with a sarcasm so thick it could have clogged the speaker. His crazy mother won't let us in. His crazy mother. Not your mother. Just his. I stayed silent, my eyes drifting to the small tablet on my dresser that was connected to my porch security camera. I tapped the screen. And there they were. A whole tableau of misery, staged for maximum effect. My son Kevin stood hunched by the railing looking ashamed, his eyes fixed on the floorboards. Brenda was front and center, phone pressed to her ear, one hand on her hip in a pose of pure defiance. And my 4 grandchildren, bless their hearts, were scattered amongst a mountain of luggage. Suitcases, duffel bags, plastic totes stacked high. Enough stuff for a month. No more. Enough for a whole summer. And the final damning detail hit me like a punch to the gut. There was no car in sight. No minivan in my driveway. No rental parked on the street. They hadn't driven here just to be turned away. They had been dropped off. They had come to stay. We're stranded on your porch with the kids. Brenda's voice screeched again through the phone. Stranded. As if this was some unforeseen tragedy. As if I hadn't warned them. As if I hadn't laid my heart and my health bare for them just weeks before. It wasn't sadness that hit me then. It was rage. A cold, clear rage I hadn't felt in 30 years. The kind of anger that doesn't scream but calculates. The kind that sees everything with perfect, brutal clarity. I watched Brenda on the camera. She turned her back to the lens, thinking she was out of my line of sight. She leaned down and nudged my youngest granddaughter, Lily, who was only 6. She whispered something in her ear. I saw Lily shake her head. Brenda whispered again, more forcefully this time, and gave her a little push. And then, like a little actress on command, Lily crumpled onto the top step, her face buried in her hands, her small shoulders starting to shake with what looked, even from the grainy camera feed, like perfectly rehearsed sobs. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a visit. It was a calculated invasion. To understand the cold fury that was building in my chest, a fury that felt like ice water flooding a hot engine, you have to understand what happened 3 weeks ago. You have to understand the sterile, beige room at Mission Hospital where I lay staring at a ceiling tile that had a small water stain shaped like the state of Florida. A cardiologist, a man half my age with kind eyes but a brutally direct way of speaking, had just explained the procedure to me for the 3rd time. A stent. A tiny, miraculous piece of metal was now propping open a major artery in my heart, an artery they called the Widowmaker. He used the word major 4 times. He used the word delicate twice. He said my recovery would be slow, and it would be non-negotiable. And by easy, Carol, he had said, leaning in, his voice low and serious, making sure I understood the gravity. I mean no stress. 0. Your body has been through a significant trauma. We don't want any emotional or physical strain putting pressure on that new stent. No lifting anything heavier than a carton of milk. No big projects. And I cannot stress this enough, absolutely no house guests. Your home needs to be a place of quiet and healing, not a hotel. When my dear neighbor Marge drove me home 2 days later, I felt as fragile as a teacup in a rattling box. The short walk from her car to my front door, a walk I'd made 10,000 times without a thought, left me breathless and dizzy. I had to grip the railing, my knuckles white, just to make it up the 3 porch steps. I spent the next 48 hours in a fog of pain, medication, and exhaustion, mostly in bed, feeling the sharp pull of the incision with every shallow breath. It was during that time, in the lonely quiet of the house, that I knew I had to make the call. But the sheer effort of talking, of forming sentences, wore me out. So, I decided a voice memo was the next best thing. I pushed myself up in bed, propped against my late husband's favorite pillows that still faintly smelled of his aftershave. It took a surprising amount of effort. I took a slow, careful breath that caught in my chest, and pressed the record button on my phone. Kevin. I began, my voice raspy and weak, a stranger's voice. Hi, honey. I'm home now. I had to pause, gathering my strength, letting the ache in my chest subside. The surgery went fine, but it was a bit more serious than we thought. The doctor was very clear. I'm not to do much of anything for a while. I took another shaky breath. I'll need at least 6 weeks of real uninterrupted rest. I mean it, Kevin. This isn't me being dramatic. This is a direct order from my heart surgeon. No guests, no pickups from the airport, no last-minute favors. I closed my eyes, trying to infuse my voice with a loving firmness. I love you all more than anything, but I need space. I need to be alone to heal properly. Please, honey. I need you to honor this. I sent it. My finger hovered over Brenda's name in my contacts, but a wave of weariness washed over me. Sending it to her would be like throwing a rock into a hornet's nest. She'd see it as a negotiation, an opening to offer a dozen reasons why their presence would actually help me heal. No, Kevin would relay the message. He was my son. He would protect me. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Kevin. My heart, my fragile, healing heart, lifted with relief. Oh my God, Mom. Course, just rest. We'll figure something out. A tear of gratitude slipped down my cheek. I smiled, a real smile for the first time in days. He understood. He heard the plea beneath my words. Thank you, honey, I typed back, my fingers clumsy. That means the world to me. But then, just as I was setting the phone down, feeling safe and cared for, it buzzed again. Another text from Kevin's number, sent only 4 minutes after the first one. The tone was completely, jarringly different. It was clipped, cool, and dismissive. All the warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling finality. Actually, we won't bother you at all. Rest easy. My smile vanished. The air in the room grew cold. I could practically see the scene in my mind. Kevin showing Brenda my message, his face etched with concern, and Brenda snatching the phone from his hand, her lips pursed in annoyance, her thumbs flying across the screen to type out that cold, corporate-sounding dismissal. We'll figure something out, the words of a concerned son, had been vetoed and replaced with we won't bother you, the words of an inconvenienced daughter-in-law. I foolishly waited for a follow-up. A call. An offer from Kevin to have groceries delivered. Something. But nothing came. I checked our family group chat. The app showed that Brenda had listened to my entire voice memo. There was no reply. Not a single word. Just the cold, blue checkmark indicating she had received my message and chosen to ignore it. A week later, still feeling weak but determined to be absolutely clear, I sent one more message to the group. Shorter this time. Just a gentle reminder I won't be available to help this month. Hope the kids are enjoying their break. That one went completely unanswered by both of them. I got the hint. So did my body. I stopped trying. I stopped expecting. They knew I was down. They knew I was recovering from a major heart procedure. They knew I was alone. And now they stood on my steps with all their worldly possessions, acting as if I'd been counting the days until I could cook and clean for 6 people again. They hadn't just forgotten. They hadn't miscommunicated. They had heard my desperate plea for space to heal, looked at each other, and decided that their need for a free summer vacation was more important than my heart. I took them at their word when they said, rest easy. That was my first mistake. I stared at the tablet, my knuckles white where I gripped the edges. The scene Brenda was directing on my front porch was a sickeningly brilliant piece of theater. The performance was for an audience of one, me watching from inside my prison, and for any curious neighbors who might be passing by. Lily, my sweet, innocent granddaughter, was now sobbing convincingly into her hands, her small shoulders shaking. Brenda was patting her back with a pantomime of maternal concern, all while holding her phone to her ear and pacing the length of the porch like a caged, wronged animal. She was making sure Mrs. Henderson next door, who was watering her petunias, got a good view of the unfolding tragedy. She wanted witnesses to my cold-hearted cruelty. Then her voice, artificially loud and strained with a fake, quavering emotion, carried through my closed window. "I just don't understand what's gotten into her," she said, projecting for the whole neighborhood to hear. "We drove all the way from Charlotte to surprise her. We were so worried after her surgery. The kids just miss their grandma so much." Lie after lie after lie. They hadn't driven. There was no car. This was no surprise. This was an ambush. And the only thing she was worried about was the possibility of having to pay for a hotel. My phone started ringing again. This time the caller ID showed a Florida area code. My heart sank. It was my sister, Sharon. Of course, Brenda wasn't just performing for the neighbors. She was taking her show on the road, calling in the emotional air support, ensuring I was attacked from all sides. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Sharon was a worrier by nature, a fixer. Brenda knew exactly what she was doing, casting herself as the concerned daughter-in-law and me as the unstable matriarch. I let it ring, my mind racing. I couldn't answer. Not yet. I didn't have my facts straight. All I had was a gut feeling, and Brenda's lies were always more convincing than my gut feelings. A minute later, a text from Sharon popped up. A string of frantic words. "Carol, what in God's name is going on? Brenda just called me, absolutely hysterical. She says you've locked them out, changed the locks, and won't even answer the door. She said she's worried you're having some kind of post-op breakdown. Are you okay? You're scaring me. Call me immediately." I felt a surge of hot, helpless anger. Brenda had poisoned the well before I could even get a bucket. She had painted me as an unhinged, heartless, and mentally unstable old woman before I even had a chance to explain my side. I could just imagine the story she was spinning for Sharon. A tale of a confused post-surgery mother who had suddenly and cruelly turned on her loving, supportive family. It was a classic Brenda move, a strategy of preemptive attack designed to isolate me, to make me the problem, to apply so much external pressure that I would have no choice but to surrender and open the door. In the past, it would have worked. 100 times out of 100. I would have felt the sting of shame, the panic of my family worrying, the crushing weight of their disapproval. I would have caved. I would have unlocked the deadbolt just to make the drama stop, to restore the false peace, even at the cost of my own well-being. But something inside me had snapped shut, as decisively as a bank vault door. Seeing Lily being used as a pawn, hearing the blatant lies about a surprise visit being broadcast across my lawn, it was like a switch had been flipped in my soul. The years of quiet resentment, of biting my tongue when Brenda made a snide comment, of letting things slide for the sake of a family peace that only ever benefited them, it all curdled into a hard, immovable resolve. I was not the crazy one, and I would not let her make me out to be. I watched Brenda end her call with Sharon, a triumphant little smirk on her face. She then gathered the 3 older children around her, crouching down to their level. I saw her point a long manicured finger directly at the small black dome of the security camera above the door, a camera they had never paid attention to in all their visits. She said something to them, her expression serious and conspiratorial. And then my grandson Michael, who was 12 and old enough to know better, looked straight up at it, his face a perfect mirror of his mother's manufactured outrage. He balled up his small fist and made a rude gesture right at the camera. Right at me. It was a gesture full of a contempt that a 12-year-old boy could only have been taught. In that moment I realized Brenda had not only cast herself as the victim in this play, she had cast me as the monster to my own grandchildren. She was teaching them to see me not as their loving grandmother who was recovering from a serious medical procedure, but as an enemy who was purposefully, cruelly hurting them. She wasn't just disrespecting my boundaries. She was actively, maliciously turning my family against me, right there on my front porch for the world to see. My own sister was starting to believe her lies. But Brenda's biggest lie was one I hadn't even discovered yet, and when I did, I knew it would be 1,000 times worse. My hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from a potent cocktail of rage and adrenaline. I had to prove to Sharon, and maybe to the last doubting part of myself that I wasn't the crazy one. I needed cold, hard proof. Something concrete that would blow Brenda's manipulative, tear-soaked story to pieces. My mind raced, sifting through the facts. Why now? Why show up at the beginning of summer, unannounced, with enough luggage to outfit a small army? It didn't make any sense, unless they had nowhere else to go. A cold, dreadful thought began to form in the back of my mind. A possibility so audacious, so calculatingly selfish, that I almost dismissed it as a paranoid fantasy. But with Brenda, you could never dismiss the audacious. Her entire life was built on it. With a trembling finger, I closed the security camera app on my tablet and opened the web browser. My heart was pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs, a physical manifestation of the terror and fury warring inside me. I typed Zillow into the search bar. The real estate website loaded. Its cheerful orange and blue logo, a sickeningly stark contrast to the darkness that was closing in on me. I navigated to the search bar at the top of the page. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages as I typed in their address in Charlotte. A nice 4-bedroom house in a good school district. A house I had helped them secure the down payment for 5 years ago. I had given them a check for $50,000, a significant portion of Frank's life insurance policy, what little inheritance he had to leave. I remembered the day I gave it to them. The tears in Kevin's eyes, Brenda's tight, grateful hug. I had been so happy to give it, to help them build their life, to give my grandchildren a stable home. The memory now felt like acid in my throat. My finger hovered over the enter key. What was I even expecting to find? What was this horrifying hunch that was making my stomach churn? Maybe that it was for sale? That they were in some kind of deep financial trouble they hadn't told me about? That would be bad, but it would be understandable. I could help with that. It wouldn't be malicious. I took a deep breath and pressed enter. The page loaded. And there it was. Their house. The familiar red brick facade, the big oak tree in the front yard where I'd pushed my grandkids on the tire swing 100 times. But the photo was too perfect, the lawn too green, the sky too blue. It was a professional real estate photo. And above it, in big, bold letters that seemed to scream at me from the screen, were the words I was somehow expecting but still wasn't prepared for. For rent. My breath caught in my throat. A choked, strangled sound. I felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. I clicked on the listing, my hand moving on its own accord. The price was staggering. $3,000 a month. And then I saw the status right next to the price, a little red banner with 2 devastating, world-shattering words. Leased. 2 days ago. Leased. They had rented out their own home to strangers. Just 2 days ago. They had probably signed the papers, collected the deposit, and driven straight here. I started scrolling through the gallery of photos, my stomach twisting into a tighter and tighter knot with each click. The photos were of an empty house. Their comfortable, lived-in family home was gone. The big sectional sofa where we'd all piled in to watch movies was gone. The family photos were gone from the mantelpiece. The kids' colorful, chaotic drawings were gone from the refrigerator door. The scuff marks on the hallway wall where my grandson Michael once crashed his bike, a mark they'd always promised to paint over but never did, were gone. Their entire life had been packed up, sanitized, scrubbed clean of any personality, and put into storage. It all clicked into place. Every last piece of the ugly, premeditated puzzle. The unannounced arrival. The mountain of luggage. The missing car. The carefully orchestrated public drama. The pressure campaign on my sister. This wasn't a spontaneous visit. This wasn't a family in crisis needing temporary shelter. This was a cold, calculated 6-month business plan. They had secured their rental income for the entire summer and fall, pocketing thousands of dollars tax-free, and had then driven straight to my house, fully intending to live off of me in my home, while I was supposed to be in bed, helpless and recovering from heart surgery. I was not their mother. I was not their grandmother. I was their free summer rental. Their unpaid chef, their maid, their full-time nanny, their laundromat. I was just a convenience, a line item in their budget listed under housing. $0. I stared at the screen, at the picture of their empty, echoing living room. A wave of nausea, acrid and hot, washed over me. The tablet slipped from my slick fingers and clattered onto the floor. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't just a lack of consideration. This was a level of deceit so profound, so utterly without conscience, that it felt like a physical betrayal, like a knife twisting in my already scarred and tender chest. The photos confirmed my worst fear. They hadn't come to use my guest room. They had come to take over my home. Staring at that Zillow listing, the screen glowing with the evidence of their betrayal, it felt like my entire history with them flashed before my eyes. But it wasn't the happy, Hallmark card version. It was the director's cut, the one that showed all the ugly deleted scenes. It was a long, itemized list of my own foolishness, a chronicle of every time I had allowed myself to be a convenience instead of a person. The first image that flooded my mind was from 2 summers ago. Brenda had called me. Her voice a syrupy sweet melody that always set my teeth on edge. "Carol, I'm just so drained. My energy is completely blocked. I found this amazing women's spiritual retreat in Sedona. It's a journey of self-discovery. It's only for 10 days. Do you think you could possibly watch the kids? It would literally save my life." I had my doubts. A spiritual retreat that cost $5,000 and had a poolside bar sounded more like a luxury vacation. But Kevin had gotten on the phone, his voice earnest. "It would mean a lot to her, Mom. She's been really stressed." And so I'd said yes. Of course I did. 10 days turned into 12 because Brenda just wasn't ready to return to the real world yet. During those 12 days, my youngest granddaughter came down with a stomach flu. I was up with her for 2 straight nights, cleaning up messes, holding a cool cloth to her forehead, while Brenda was posting pictures on social media of herself doing sunrise yoga on a picturesque cliff. I called them once just to let them know she was sick, and Brenda had answered, sounding annoyed that I was interrupting her vibrational alignment. "Just give her some ginger ale," she'd said breezily. "She'll be fine." When they finally returned, tanned and glowing, Brenda handed me a cheap, souvenir keychain shaped like a cactus and said, "Thanks, you're a lifesaver," before immediately getting on her phone to text her friends about her transformative journey. There was no real thank you, no offer to give me a break. I had simply served my purpose. Then another memory surfaced, sharper and infinitely more painful. It was just 6 months after Frank passed away. I was still drowning in grief, walking through my own house like a ghost. One afternoon, Kevin and Brenda came over, supposedly to check on me. Brenda, under the guise of helping me declutter, started going through Frank's old things in his office, things I hadn't had the strength to even look at yet. She picked up his Rolex, the beautiful steel watch he'd received for 30 years of dedicated service at the university. It was his pride and joy, a symbol of a lifetime of hard work. "This is beautiful," she'd said, her eyes gleaming. "Kevin should have it. To remember his dad." Before I could even process the words, before I could say that I wasn't ready to part with it, she had slipped it into her purse. "I'll keep it safe for him," she'd said with a bright, false smile. A month later, at a family dinner, I quietly asked Kevin if he was wearing the watch. He looked down at his plate, his face flushing with embarrassment. "Oh, Brenda put it somewhere safe. So safe she can't seem to remember where. It was never mentioned again. They had lost it. Or sold it. I never knew which. My husband's most cherished possession, a piece of his legacy, a tangible piece of my life with him, gone because of her greed and his weakness. There was no real apology, no offer to replace it, not that they could. It was just gone, an inconvenience they preferred to forget. For them it was a valuable object. For me it was a piece of my heart. She had essentially committed theft of my most precious memory of my husband. The slideshow of my life as a doormat continued, each memory more infuriating than the last. The time I waited 6 months for an appointment with a top rheumatologist for my crippling arthritis, only to cancel it at the last minute because Kevin's babysitter bailed, and he had a career-making conference call he absolutely couldn't miss. He never asked if I could reschedule. He just assumed I would drop everything for him. And I did. I spent that afternoon watching cartoons with my grandkids while my joints ached, a dull, throbbing pain that was a perfect metaphor for my relationship with my son. The final memory, the one that made the cold rage in my chest burn white-hot, was from last Thanksgiving. I had spent 2 days cooking, roasting a 20-pound turkey, making everything from scratch just the way they liked it. When I brought out the sweet potato casserole, a recipe passed down from my own mother, Brenda looked at the dish, wrinkled her nose in disgust, and said in front of everyone, "Oh, you made it with the crunchy pecan topping. The kids only eat the marshmallow kind." She then proceeded to scoop around the topping for the kids, making a show of picking out the yucky parts, as if I had intentionally tried to ruin their meal. Later that evening, I was in the hallway, putting on my coat to go home, and I overheard her talking to her sister on the phone in a low, conspiratorial whisper. "I know it's a bit of a chore coming here," she'd whispered. "But honestly, she should be grateful we even visit. It gives her something to do. Otherwise, she'd just be sitting here all alone. Grateful. I should be grateful. Grateful for being the unpaid, unappreciated babysitter, the short-order cook, the doormat. Grateful for my husband's memory being treated like loose change. Grateful for being seen as a chore, a pity case." Each memory was a steel-reinforced brick in the wall I was about to build. And I decided right then and there that this wall would be made of impenetrable steel. The decision was made. The years of quiet accommodation, of swallowing my own needs for the sake of a fragile one-sided peace, were officially over. My home, this sanctuary that Frank and I had poured our life savings and our love into, was about to become a fortress. And I was going to be its queen. My first call wasn't to Kevin or Brenda. It wasn't to my sister to plead my case. It was to a man named Gus Henderson. Gus was a locksmith, a semi-retired Army veteran with hands like worn leather and an honest, weathered face. He had helped me once before, years ago, when some teenagers broke into our garden shed to steal Frank's old lawnmower. He had been kind, efficient, and discreet. I found his number in my old dog-eared address book, the one with names and numbers crossed out and rewritten over decades. He answered on the second ring, his voice a gravelly baritone. "Henderson's Locks." "Gus, it's Carol Miller," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The trembling had stopped. It had been replaced by a chilling calm. "Carol, good to hear your voice, ma'am. Hope it's not another break-in at that shed of yours." "In a way it is, Gus," I said, the words tasting like iron. "But it's the main house this time. I need you to come over. I need every single lock on this house changed. Front door, back door, the sliding glass door to the patio, the basement door, even the deadbolt on the garage that leads into the kitchen. Everything. I want the entire property secured." There was a short, perceptive pause on the other end. Gus wasn't one for gossip, but he was a keen observer of the human condition. "Everything okay, Carol?" "Everything is about to be, Gus," I replied, a hint of steel in my own voice. "Everything is about to be set right. How soon can you get here?" He arrived 45 minutes later in his dusty blue work van, the Henderson's Locks and Security logo faded on the side. He took one long, slow look at the family camped out on my porch. By now Brenda had orchestrated a full-blown pity party. The kids were listlessly picking at a box of donuts someone, probably a neighbor she'd flagged down with her sob story, had dropped off for them. Kevin was staring blankly at the street, the picture of a defeated man. Brenda was on the phone again, her voice loud and theatrical. Gus looked at the scene, then looked at me standing in the doorway. He didn't ask a single question. He just gave me a slow, deliberate nod, a look of grim, masculine understanding passing between us. He walked right past them without a word, his heavy toolbox in his hand, and gave Brenda a stare so hard and cold that she actually faltered in her speech. "Let's get to work," he said to me quietly as he stepped inside. As Gus started the noisy, violent process of drilling out the old lock on the front door, a sound that was pure, sweet music to my ears, I walked with a new, determined sense of purpose to Frank's old office. It was a room I hadn't spent much time in since he passed. It still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco, leather-bound books, and quiet contemplation. I went to the large oak filing cabinet in the corner and pulled open the bottom drawer. It squeaked in protest. There, beneath a stack of old tax returns and appliance warranties, was a heavy black leather binder. I carried it to the dining room table, the one Frank had built himself, and set it down with a solid, satisfying thud. The embossed gold letters on the front read, "The Miller Family Estate Plan." Frank had been meticulous. He believed in being prepared for anything. He had sat down with our lawyer every 5 years to make sure everything was in order. He just never imagined the thing I'd need to be prepared for was a hostile takeover from our own son. I zipped it open. Inside, pristine plastic sleeves held every important document of our lives, all perfectly organized. The deed to the house, car titles, insurance policies, bank statements, investment portfolios. And in the very back, behind a tab labeled Final Directives, was the document that now held all the power, our last will and testament. I slid the thick sheaf of paper out of its sleeve. My hands were perfectly steady now. The rage had cooled and hardened into something else. Something solid. Something unbreakable. Determination. I turned the pages, my eyes scanning the familiar legal language, the paragraphs that Frank and I had agonized over with our attorney, Mr. Abernathy. It was all there just as we had planned it in what now felt like a different lifetime. Everything to be left to the surviving spouse, and upon that spouse's death, everything to be passed down to our only son, Kevin Miller. Gus came into the dining room from the hallway, wiping his hands on a rag. He held up a shiny new brass deadbolt and key. "Front door is secure as Fort Knox, Carol," he announced. "No one's getting through that without this key, and I'm only making one copy for you." I looked from the new lock in his hand to the will on my table. "Thank you, Gus," I said, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face for the first time that day. "You have no idea. The locks were the first step to securing my house. What I did next would secure my future, my legacy, and my peace of mind." With the comforting sounds of Gus drilling and hammering away at the back door, I sat at the dining room table, the will spread out before me like a battlefield map. This document wasn't just paper and ink. It was the culmination of a lifetime of hard work, of sacrifice, of love. Frank's 30 years of teaching at the university, my 35 years managing the county library, every mortgage payment we'd made on time, every careful investment we'd nurtured, it was all represented in these pages. And it was all designated to go to a son who was, at that very moment, sitting on my porch, a willing participant in a cruel scheme to treat me like an unpaid servant in my own home. My eyes scanned the pages, landing on the key phrases. Article 3. Disposition of residuary estate. And there it was in clear, simple type that now seemed to mock me. I give, devise, and bequeath all the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, both real and personal, to my beloved son, Kevin Miller. Beloved son. The words felt like a cruel, twisted joke. A beloved son wouldn't let his wife verbally abuse his mother. A beloved son wouldn't stand by silently, while his mother's clearly stated medical needs were trampled underfoot. Next, I flipped to the durable power of attorney and the healthcare directive. In the event I was incapacitated, my medical decisions, my finances, my very life would be in Kevin's hands. And by extension, in Brenda's. The thought sent a violent, icy chill down my spine. I imagined Brenda standing by my hospital bed, her face a mask of false concern, whispering to the doctors that Carol wouldn't want to live like this, all while mentally calculating how quickly she could liquidate my assets after the funeral. The possibility was so vivid, so terrifyingly plausible, that it solidified my resolve into something as hard as granite. I opened the drawer in the dining room buffet, the one where we kept the good silverware and stationery. I took out a heavy black felt-tip pen, the same kind Frank used for marking up blueprints. Its ink was dark, permanent, and unforgiving. With a steady hand, I drew a single thick black line through the words, "My beloved son Kevin Miller." I did it again and again on every page where his name appeared as a beneficiary, a trustee, and executor. The ink bled through the paper slightly, a dark, permanent stain. An erasure of 40 years of misplaced trust. Then I took out a fresh sheet of crisp, legal-sized paper. At the top, I wrote in my neatest cursive, "Codicil to the last will and testament of Carol Miller," and I dated it with that day's date, a date I knew I would never forget. I didn't need a lawyer for this part. I had sat through enough meetings with Mr. Abernathy to know the language. I just needed clarity and intent. I wrote, "I hereby revoke any and all bequests made to my son, Kevin Miller, in my original will." Simple, direct, unambiguous. Then I named my new primary beneficiary. My niece Sarah. My sister Sharon's daughter. Sarah was a quiet, kind-hearted pediatric nurse who lived in Raleigh. She called me every Sunday afternoon without fail just to chat about her week, to ask about my garden, to tell me a funny story about one of her young patients. She never asked for a thing. She would be a responsible, compassionate steward of what Frank and I had built. Next, I addressed the power of attorney. I drew a thick line through Kevin's name and wrote in Sarah's. She would honor my wishes. She would respect my dignity. She would not see my potential illness as a burden or an opportunity, but as a duty of love. Then I got to the part about the guardianship of the college funds I had set up for each of my 4 grandchildren. Originally, Brenda was listed as the guardian, a decision that now seemed laughably naive. I actually laughed out loud, a short, bitter, barking sound that echoed in the quiet room. Giving Brenda control over that money would be like giving a fox the keys to the henhouse and a map to the best eggs. I struck her name out with such force that the pen tore the paper slightly. In her place, I designated the funds to be managed by a professional trustee from our local bank, a man I trusted implicitly. The money would be protected, firewalled from their parents' greed and poor judgment. Finally, at the bottom of the codicil, I added one last sentence, my own personal touch, a final declaration of my independence. It wasn't legalese, but it was the truest thing I had ever written. It is my express wish and final directive that no portion of my estate, financial or otherwise, shall ever be used for the benefit of any individual who has shown a deliberate and sustained disregard for my personal boundaries, my physical health, and my emotional well-being. I signed my name at the bottom with a flourish. It was done. I hadn't screamed or cried or thrown things. I had simply corrected a mistake. A 40-year-old mistake rooted in the blind hope that my son would one day become the man I had raised him to be. I had removed their names from my inheritance. Now it was time to remove them from my payroll. If you think what I did with the will was harsh, if you think that was the ultimate act of a mother pushed too far, you need to hear what happened next. Because this is the part that truly shows their character. This is the part that proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that this was never about love or family. It was about money. It was always about the money. Gus finished up a little after noon. He walked me through the house, demonstrating each new lock, each new deadbolt. The house felt secure, solid, impenetrable. The silence was wonderful. I paid him, adding a generous tip. He looked at the money, then back at me, and gave my shoulder a gentle, fatherly squeeze. "You take care of yourself, Carol," he said. And the look in his eyes told me he understood more than I had said. After he left, I made myself a fresh cup of tea and sat back down at the dining room table. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving behind a profound sense of calm and clarity. The binder was still open. There was one more piece of business to attend to, one last financial tie that bound me to their toxic entitlement. For the past 6 years, ever since my oldest grandson Mark had started at Maplewood Country Day, a very exclusive and very expensive private high school, I had been paying his tuition. It was my gift to him. I was a librarian. I believed in the power of education above all else. I wanted him to have the best possible start in life, a better start than Frank or I had ever had. The payment was an automatic transfer from my investment account to the school's account on the 1st of every August. Today was July 28th. The college fund was separate, but this direct tuition was a significant, ongoing expense. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Maplewood's business office. A pleasant-sounding woman with a crisp, professional voice answered. "Maplewood Country Day Accounts Office, this is Diane speaking." "Hello, Diane," I said, my own voice calm and businesslike. "My name is Carol Miller. My grandson Mark Miller is a student there, entering his junior year." "Of course, Mrs. Miller. I recognize your name from the payment schedules. You are always so wonderfully prompt. How can I help you today?" "I'm calling about the tuition payment for the upcoming academic year," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. "I need to make a significant change to the funding arrangement." "All right," she said, and I could hear the gentle rhythmic tapping of a keyboard in the background. "I see the automatic payment is scheduled for this Friday. What change did you need to make? A different account, perhaps?" "I need to cancel that payment," I said. "Permanently." There was a distinct pause on the other end of the line. The tapping stopped. "Cancel it? I'm sorry, did you say cancel? Is there an issue with the transfer or the school?" "No issue at all with the school," I said smoothly, a newfound confidence flowing through me. "The issue is that I will no longer be funding the tuition directly from my account. I have made the decision to place the equivalent funds for his remaining 2 years, plus a significant amount more for his university education, into a professionally managed educational trust for Mark." I could practically hear her mind working, trying to process this. "Oh, that's very generous, Mrs. Miller." "I think so too," I said. "And the trust is very specific. It is an irrevocable trust, managed by a third-party firm. They will handle all future payments directly to educational institutions. However, the trust has a specific clause that my son and daughter-in-law should be aware of. The funds are only to be used for tuition and approved educational expenses, and will only become available to Mark for his own discretionary use after he turns 25 years old, provided he has successfully completed a 4-year college degree. I just wanted to inform you so you can update your records and contact my son and daughter-in-law, Kevin and Brenda Miller, to make arrangements for this fall semester's payment, as it will no longer be coming from me. I was calm. I was professional. I was not punishing my grandson. I was protecting his future from his parents' short-sighted greed. I was ensuring his college fund wouldn't be drained to pay for another one of Brenda's spiritual retreats, or to cover a promotion party for Kevin. I was cutting the financial cord that they had come to see not as a gift, but as an entitlement. Diane sounded flustered, caught off guard. I see. Well, this is certainly a change. I will certainly make a note in his file, and our billing department will be in touch with Mr. and Mrs. Miller immediately. Thank you for letting us know, Mrs. Miller. We hung up. I sat in the profound silence of the house, a silence broken only by the steady rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was the sound of a countdown, a time bomb I had just set. I knew it wouldn't take long for the shockwave to hit my front porch. The phone rang less than an hour later. The caller ID flashed Brenda. I smiled, took a sip of my now cold tea, and let it ring. On the 4th ring, I picked up, pressed the speaker button, and set it on the table. The screaming that came through the speaker when I finally said, "Hello," could have shattered glass. What did you do? It wasn't a question. It was a shriek. A sound so high-pitched and full of venom it made the phone on the table vibrate. Brenda, I have no idea what you're talking about, I said, my voice as calm and placid as a frozen lake. I was determined not to let her hear a single tremor of emotion. Don't you play dumb with me, you spiteful, evil old woman, she screamed, the words tumbling over each other in a torrent of fury. The school just called. Diane from the billing office. She said you cut off Mark's tuition. You're punishing the kids for this. You're taking away his future. How could you be so cruel? Cruel. I let the word hang in the air between us, savoring it. Let's have a real conversation about the word cruel, Brenda. Is it cruel to expect a 68-year-old woman, your own mother-in-law, to host 6 people for an entire summer while she is trying to recover from major heart surgery? Tell me, is that cruel? There was a split second of shocked silence on the other end. She wasn't expecting me to know. She wasn't expecting me to fight back with facts. Is it cruel? I continued, my voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. To rent out your house, pack up your entire life, and dump it all on her doorstep without so much as a single phone call? Is it cruel to use your own 6-year-old daughter as a prop in a public drama to manipulate your neighbors and family into thinking you're the victim? We were in a bind, she stammered, her voice losing its shrill, confident edge and becoming whiny and defensive. We were just going to ask you. It was a surprise. No, you weren't, I said, my voice like ice. That is the biggest lie of all. You were going to tell me. You've been doing it for years, Brenda. You don't ask, you assume. You don't request, you demand. You see me as a service, a resource, a free utility to be turned on whenever you need it. Well, the service has been permanently discontinued. As for Mark's education and his future, it is more secure than it has ever been. It's in a trust, legally firewalled and protected from anyone who might see a large sum of money as their personal slush fund for a new car or a trip to Hawaii. I could hear her sputtering, searching for a new line of attack, a new way to frame herself as the injured party. This is about your pride. You are destroying this family over your petty, wounded pride. No, Brenda, I said, the calmness in my own voice surprising even me. It was the calm of absolute certainty. I'm not destroying this family. You and Kevin did that when you decided that lying and scheming were acceptable substitutes for honesty and respect. I'm teaching my grandchildren a lesson that you and Kevin have clearly failed to teach them. That actions have real, tangible consequences. This isn't about pride. It's about respect. A concept you seem entirely, fundamentally unfamiliar with. She screamed something incoherent, a string of curses and insults that I couldn't quite make out, and then the line went dead. The silence that filled the room was deafening. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I just felt empty. It was the relief of a long, painful surgery being over, but a deep sadness for the limb that had to be amputated. An hour later, as I knew he would, Kevin called. His voice was different. Not angry like Brenda's, but pleading, desperate, and utterly pathetic. It was the voice of a little boy who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Mom, please," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Just let us in for tonight. We have nowhere to go. We can talk about this in the morning. She's really upset. The kids are scared." "I'm sure she is upset," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. It must be very upsetting when a carefully laid, deceitful plan falls apart so spectacularly. And the kids are scared because their parents have put them in a scary, unstable situation. "This is not on me, Kevin. This is on you." "It wasn't like that," he lied, but his voice had no conviction. It was the weak, reflexive lie of a man who has been lying to himself for years. "Don't, Kevin," I warned him, and my voice dropped, becoming hard as flint. "Don't you dare lie to me. Not anymore. I know you rented the house. I saw the Zillow listing. I saw the empty rooms where my grandchildren used to sleep. I saw the professional photos you took after you erased every trace of your life there." He was silent. It was the profound, suffocating silence of a man caught in a lie so big, so comprehensive. There was no escaping it. He was trapped. "Why, Kevin?" I asked, and for the first time, a tremor of real raw pain entered my voice. "Why would you do that to me? After everything Frank and I did for you? The down payment on that house came from your father's life insurance. It was his legacy to you, and you used it to betray me. Why?" "We just needed the money," he mumbled, the pathetic, eternal excuse of a weak man. "Brenda. She wanted to do some renovations. It was just for a few months. And I was the solution." I finished for him, the words tasting like poison. "The easy, free solution you didn't even have the decency to ask. You didn't just cross the line, Kevin. You and your wife took a bulldozer and plowed over it, then you backed up and ran over it again just to be sure. You rented out your life, and you expected me to finance your vacation from responsibility. So what happens now?" he asked, his voice small, the question of a child who wants a parent to fix everything. "Now you become a parent," I said, the words coming out clear and final, a closing statement on our old relationship. "You find a hotel for your family. You use that rental income you were so eager to get. You figure out your living situation. You take care of your children. You stop using your mother as your emergency plan, your financial backstop, and your emotional punching bag. I have loved you and supported you and made excuses for you for 40 years, Kevin. I am done now." He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He didn't even try to defend himself. He just said, "Okay, Mom," in a voice so quiet I could barely hear it, and he hung up the phone. The click of the disconnection echoed in the room. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the sound of my own hard-won and long overdue freedom. The rest of the afternoon was silent. Not the tense, waiting silence from before, but a deep, settled quiet. Through my front window I saw an Uber XL, a black Suburban, pull up to the curb. I didn't hide. I stood in my living room and watched as Kevin and Brenda loaded the mountain of luggage into the back. It was an awkward, clumsy process, full of sighs and muttered frustrations. Kevin moved with the slumped shoulders of a man who had been thoroughly defeated. Brenda's movements were sharp and angry, slamming a suitcase into the trunk with unnecessary force. The kids looked tired, bewildered, and confused. For a fleeting moment, as I watched my youngest granddaughter, Lily, climb into the car without looking back, I felt a sharp pang of pity for them. They were innocent pawns in their parents' selfish, poorly executed game of chess. But then I remembered the image of Lily, being coached by her mother to cry on my porch, and the rude, defiant gesture from my grandson Michael, and the pity evaporated. It was replaced by a grim certainty that I had done the right thing. I was not just protecting myself. I was drawing a hard, bright line that one day those children might see and understand the importance of. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street, and it felt like a 40-year-old fever had finally broken. For 3 days there was nothing. No calls, no texts, no unexpected visitors, no passive-aggressive emails. The silence in my house was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace. It was a beautiful, expansive quiet that allowed me to hear my own thoughts for the first time in years. I read my books. I started a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle of a Monet painting on the dining room table. I sat on the back porch in the mornings with my coffee, listening to the birds bicker and sing. A simple, profound pleasure I hadn't truly allowed myself to enjoy in years. I felt my heart, my physical, healing heart, beating in a slow, steady rhythm, unburdened by the stress they always brought. On the fourth day, my sister Sharon called. I hesitated for a moment before answering, but then I took a breath and picked up. Her voice when she spoke was quiet and thick with shame. "Carol," she said, her voice cracking on my name. "Oh, Carol. I am so sorry." "What for, Sharon?" I asked gently, though I already knew. "I talked to Sarah," she said, referring to her daughter, my niece. "I told her I was worried about you, that Brenda had called. And Sarah, oh Carol, she set me straight. She told me that Brenda has been bragging to Sarah's cousin for weeks about their genius summer plan. That's what she called it. A genius plan. About how they were going to bank so much money by living with you for free, and how you'd be so grateful for the company you wouldn't mind. I can't believe I ever doubted you. I can't believe I listened to her poison. Can you ever forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive, Sharon," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "You were manipulated by a master. She's very good at what she does. I should know. I was her primary target for 15 years. We talked for over an hour after that, a real conversation full of laughter and tears, the kind we hadn't had in years, because Brenda had always been a wedge between us. The rift she had tried to create between me and my sister was already healing, knitting itself back together, stronger than before. After we hung up, I felt a final piece of the puzzle click into place. I wasn't done yet. There was one last thing to secure, one final move to make on the chessboard. I went back to Frank's office and pulled the black binder from the filing cabinet. I took out the deed to the house. This house. My home. The place that Kevin, even after all this, probably assumed would still eventually be his. An inheritance he thought was his birthright. I spent the next afternoon with an estate lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Davis who had been recommended by a friend. I sat in her plush office, the scent of leather and old paper in the air, and I explained the situation. I didn't tell her the story with anger or tears, but with a quiet, factual resolve that she seemed to respect. I showed her the Zillow listing I had printed out. I showed her the codicil I had written for my will. She listened patiently, her fingers steepled under her chin, nodding occasionally. When I was finished, she looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "Mrs. Miller," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "You have been through quite an ordeal. What precisely is the final outcome you wish to achieve?" "I want to protect my husband's legacy," I said without hesitation. "And I want to ensure that my home, which was built with love and hard work, is never ever touched by greed." By the end of our meeting, we had drafted a new irrevocable addendum to my estate, a legal document as strong as a bank vault. The binder now contained one last, final document. It was a legal directive, clear and ironclad. Upon my passing, the house at 125 Oakwood Lane, along with a significant portion of my financial assets, was not to be sold or transferred to any family member. Instead, it was to be donated in its entirety to the city of Asheville. The legal document specified that the property was to be used to establish the Frank and Carol Miller Memorial Library, a small free community library and reading garden for the neighborhood, with a special focus on children's literacy programs. My home would become a sanctuary of peace and books for everyone. Our legacy, Frank's and mine, would be one of generosity and community, not a prize to be fought over by entitled heirs who thought love could be measured in square footage. I went home and placed the binder back in the drawer of Frank's desk. I turned the key. This time, when I locked it, I felt a profound sense of finality, of a story finding its proper ending. The war was over. I had protected myself, my assets, my sanity, and the memory of my husband. I had taken their selfish, greedy plan and transmuted it into a beautiful, lasting gift for others. Brenda had wanted my house for a summer. Now the community would have it forever. I looked at the old photo of Frank on the mantelpiece, his kind eyes smiling at me. "We did it, honey," I whispered to him. "We protected it." That evening, for the first time since my surgery, I slept through the entire night. It was a deep, dreamless, and profoundly restorative sleep. I woke up the next morning to the gentle morning light filtering through my curtains, not to a violent pounding on my door. There was no knot of anxiety in my stomach, no familiar feeling of impending dread. There was just quiet, a beautiful, expansive, and welcome quiet. I made myself a pot of strong black coffee the way Frank and I used to drink it, and took it out to the back porch. The air was cool and smelled of the honeysuckle from the vine climbing the trellis, a scent I hadn't truly noticed in years. I sat in my favorite rocking chair and watched a blue jay bicker with a fat, indignant squirrel on the bird feeder. They were ordinary sounds, the simple soundtrack of a peaceful life. And they were the most beautiful sounds in the world. There was no drama, no performance, no one to please but myself. My home was mine again. My life was mine again. I thought about Kevin and Brenda, and for the first time I felt no anger. I didn't feel hatred. I felt a kind of distant, detached pity. They were so busy chasing easy money and shortcuts, so wrapped up in their own entitlement, that they had lost sight of everything that truly mattered. They had traded their mother's love, their children's true inheritance, a legacy of family and unconditional support, for a few months' rent. It was a terrible, foolish bargain, and one day I think they'll realize it. Or maybe they won't. And I finally understood, with a clarity that was like a sunrise in my soul, that it was no longer my concern. My job as their emergency plan, their safety net, their financial backstop, their doormat was over. My new job, my only job, was simply to be Carol. Later that week, feeling stronger than I had in months, I drove to the county library, my old stomping grounds. The moment I walked in, the familiar scent of paper, binding glue, and knowledge enveloped me like a warm hug. I saw my former colleagues, who greeted me with surprised smiles and warm embraces. I walked through the aisles, running my hand along the spines of the books, feeling the quiet, powerful energy of a place dedicated to stories and learning. I felt like I had come home. Before I left, I signed up for a volunteer shift, reading to children in the kids section on Tuesday mornings. Felt right. Felt like a perfect circle. My life is quieter now, but it is fuller. It is richer. It is my own. The wall I built that day, the one made of new locks and legal documents, the one made of steel, wasn't to keep the world out. It was to let me finally live peacefully inside. It turns out the sturdiest locks are meant to protect the most precious things. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing, more precious than your own peace of mind. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. I know it was a long one, but it was important for me to tell it, to get it all out. I shared this very personal part of my life because I know deep in my bones that I'm not the only one who has ever felt this way, who has ever been made to feel small in their own home. So my question for you is this. What was the moment you knew you had to choose yourself over the unreasonable demands of others? Let me know your story in the comments below. I promise you I'll be reading them. And if my story resonated with you, if it touched a part of your own experience, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories. It helps more than you know, and it lets me know that I'm not alone.